Take a seat. I've just stoked the flame. I want to tell you a story. One of betrayal, survival, zealous insanity, one of hope, and at the same time, the absence. It's as cold as this valley. In fact, this very tale took place here. Somewhere in this frigid world, two men would find themselves at odds with one another, both relying on each other for survival until the miserable end. The story begins with a musher and a researcher of some kind. Where exactly they're heading is somewhat of a mystery. Deeper and deeper into the frozen hills and valleys, it became debatable as to whether or not they knew where they were going. Were they lost, or was there some sort of instinctual guidance pulling them along? The man of science was no stranger to the nooks and crannies of this inhospitable place. He had been here before, and conducted some sort of research with a handful of peers. He seems to know his way around this place, even with the ever-changing landscape, with impressive accuracy. The destination was never made clear to the musher. The promise that they were drawing near was constant, always just up ahead. A blemish on the pale surface of the world stood beneath the slope. An old cabin, one where the researcher and his colleagues had sheltered themselves from the weather. Off to one side, atop a small hill, stood a landmark. The musher, curious as ever, approached and listened. The phantoms share their story, piece by piece. Reapplying himself, the researcher urged the musher to refrain from being led astray. He advised the musher to follow his guidance in lieu of this. With both sled and dog, the only purpose he served was transportation. Not much further now. Remember that this is the first step. All your efforts will be matched twofold, or worse. This is always the true test. One I have failed again and again. And the animal falls. The scientist, seemingly pleased, takes a swig from his flask. The deer had been feeding on some sort of cold-resistant fungus. The animal's behavior remains something of a mystery. Being unfazed by people, their oddly aggressive reactions and queer migration patterns leave much to speculation. Something, somewhere, is affecting these reindeer. It's somewhat funny, really. The man of science telling the musher that the last thing he should trust is his senses, least of all his mind. In a way, though, he isn't wrong. The valley is expansive and repetitive. Becoming lost is trivial. A few degrees too many in deviation is all it would take. Ironic it may be, the researcher, not 2 minutes later, redirects the musher based on memory, out into the vast frozen sea. The further the two men delve into the white, the less sane the researcher sounds, or possibly sober. He has probably had far too much to drink at this point. Uncalled for reassurance and promises of some obtuse treat at the end of this journey. It's all worthless. The pats and scratches will satisfy the dogs. The musher, less so. There is no time for rest. Sledding down the slope, deep into the night, the researcher speaks some words of, possibly sober, wisdom, stemming from his previous expeditions. When I first came through here, I understood so very little. Not unlike you. Perhaps it was vain ambition that first led me to go further than any of my companions deemed responsible. That lies in the past. I know what my purpose is. It is the journey itself that draws us. Give your life to the pursuit of one thing, and your hard work will be rewarded. But know this, the ghosts that give chase through the gray will never leave your side, no matter how far you go. The men were, for lack of better phrasing, completely lost. The deer began moving in from the visible edge. They had to have come from somewhere, the musher thought. They have to be heading somewhere with food. Many hours would pass before any certainty would arise in this frigid hell. The researcher, on the other hand, seemed almost entertained and intrigued as to where the musher was taking them. Though the musher himself had no idea where they were, it didn't take long until he guided the dogs to follow one of the deer. Soon after, more followed. This man, the researcher, you'd swear he'd have drunk a whole pub dry with the nonsense he spoke. To the musher, he thought that the frozen wasteland was steadily eating away at the sanity of the deluded man. The decision to come here should not be met with doubt, according to him, of course. As suspected, the animals surviving this place are drawn to the sparse vegetation on land. A journal lies open on a significant entry. It read as follows. March 18th, 1892. I'm not sure what purpose my writing could serve, but I still find value in it. Perhaps it's just for my own sanity. Writing helps me recall, helps me separate my own thoughts and memories from theirs. This is, after all, what I am paid to do. We have all settled into our roles rather well, albeit with one glaring exception. His accounts of the North made great impact on my youth. So strong was the allure of the sections of the world map still uncharted, that I have found myself standing in port with all my belongings wrapped in cloth. I have always considered myself a careful, logical person. Yet, there I was, willing to put everything on the line to be given the chance to return with an account of my own. The crew there assembled was a curious sight. Misplaced among 5 hardened expeditionists stood I, a failed writer, along with 2 artists, and, of course, the ill-fated young botanist. All handpicked by our great leader, a man whose name once carried some renown in certain circles. In his eyes, I saw that same light which shone so fiercely in the horizon, leading us to the first sight. I recall that my heart sank, for I knew that that light would only ever lead us further into the gray. The following page had been blacked out, possibly an illustration as a result of madness, or simply a crude scribbling. But the musher thought to himself, in this moment of curiosity, where was my travel companion? Where had he wandered off to in the approaching hours of pitch? Dawn rises. The musher stood in place. It was as though he hadn't moved an inch all night, unaffected by the cold. The researcher had since returned from his mysterious departure, warning the musher that the 2 of them, and the dogs, were no longer safe here. The reindeer seemed to be attracted to their location, hostile as they were previously. They make haste. Here we are all bound to its grip, my body unable to move. My memories no longer my own, but I was able to reach you and to be your guide. The deluded man falls further under the weight of his purpose, to follow. When we arrived, we were outsiders to this place. Not unlike you, I am a victim of circumstance. Now, just as I brought you here, you will bring me out. Waking in a cave, the same resilient fungi had been embedded in the Musher's wounds, inflicted by the researcher. The sole source of nutrients for a starved body. The madman is nowhere to be seen. It's clear that he has taken the sled and dogs. But off in the distance, the sharp bangs of gunfire. The Musher followed the trail of brass bullet casings and bloodshed. The researcher who intended to leave the Musher for dead in the ownership of some nameless thing fell just as any man would. He received his wish, though under different circumstances. He had left this place, which owned him for so long. Ghosts of the grey shall forever follow, remain as that which gave chase, as the recollection of this place once did for another. Devour and spread